sources tell me that they received a presentation from people within the intelligence community who had interviewed Baric, who felt that all of the intelligence pointed to a lab leak, and they were dismissed as conspiracy theorists, essentially, as peddling misinformation.
Check out this headline from the Daily Caller News Foundation. Quote, spy agencies cozied up to Wuhan virologist before lying about pandemic. Emily Kopp, who's been on the show before, she's an investigative reporter over at the DCNF, has a very important news story getting us closer and closer to an explanation for what on earth was going on with taxpayer dollars in the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the entire origin of the pandemic. We're going to break down the details. Remember to subscribe over at undercurrents.tv, wherever you get your podcasts, and of course on YouTube as well. Quick announcement, by the way, before we dig into the story. This is my last edition of Undercurrents. It's been an incredible whirlwind 18 months, more than 18 months, I think, at this point. I'm not leaving Unheard. I'm going to stay on as a columnist, so you'll see me popping up. But the plans for Undercurrents are awesome. So stay tuned and just know I am enormously grateful and very, very humbled by everyone who has followed, more than 100,000 of you who have followed this show on YouTube alone. Our wonderful premium subscribers, are people who are listening to every single podcast in the thousands, downloading every single podcast into the thousands. Trying not to break into tears right now, but just know I am so grateful. I'm so humbled by your support. You know that I'll be around. I'll probably be popping up on here as well as a columnist at Unheard, but there are great plans for the Undercurrents channel. So stay tuned. What we do, as you know, is cover the news beneath the surface and try to look at it from angles that most of the media wouldn't dare look at the news through. So that's what we're planning to continue to do. Unheard is the best. I'm really grateful to our wonderful team over the last year and a half. We covered the election cycle. We covered the election itself, for like 4 hours here on election night 2024. We covered the transition, the inauguration, and the first year almost of the second Trump administration. So it's been a lot of work, a labor of love. Thanks to everybody for tuning in and subscribing. It means a lot to us. The channel is going to get bigger and better, I am sure. So thank you, everyone. Now, on to this story. Speaking of news lurking beneath the surface, this is a very, very important report. Just from the lead of Emily's story, she writes, a close collaborator of virologists who studied coronavirus in Wuhan frequently advised America's top spy agency in the lead up to the pandemic, and that same agency suppressed intelligence on the parallels between COVID-19 and their research. So this is the ODNI, the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence, that is now headed by Tulsi Gabbard, who has taken steps to disband parts of the ODNI, the intelligence world, who came out of COVID looking very bad. Emily is reporting based on new documents released by Senator Rand Paul on a meeting that was facilitated by the ODNI between the CIA and Ralph Baric. That's a name you'll know, of course, if you've followed the coronavirus lab leak origin report closely. I know many of you have. So we're talking about ODNI facilitating a meeting between the CIA and one of the top researchers in this space back during the Obama administration, and then the ODNI early in the pandemic dismissing questions about a potential lab leak. Emily joins us to break down the very important details of this very important story. So Emily Kopp, thank you so much for coming back on Undercurrents. Well, I'm so happy to be joined now once again by investigative reporter at the Daily Caller News Foundation, Emily Kopp, who has another massive story helping us get closer to the truth about our government and their responsibility in the pandemic. So, Emily, thank you. Welcome back to Undercurrents.
Great to be with you.
All right. Tell us who, before we get into the story, I was actually hoping you could tell us just who Ralph Baric actually is. Like, who is this figure at the center of your latest scoop? And then we'll dive into a little bit of what you found.
So Ralph Baric is probably the biggest coronavirus expert in the world. One of his colleagues actually referred to him in an email that I read as the big cheese in coronaviruses. He innovated what's called reverse engineering techniques related to coronaviruses. So, taking the genome of a virus and assembling a live virus from it. He also innovated this technique that he called no-seum after the no-seum gnats that are common in his home state of North Carolina, where you can chop a gene into a new virus without any traces of engineering. He's at the University of North Carolina and was working very closely with the Wuhan Institute of Virology prior to COVID. They had access to this immense store of coronaviruses, and he was the big cheese in engineering coronaviruses. So it was a natural collaboration there.
So it's really significant that Baric is the person at the center of the story that you wrote up. The headline in the Daily Caller News Foundation article is "Spy Agencies Cozied Up to Wuhan Virologist Before Lying About Pandemic." Baric is the virologist in question, and this is from new documents released by Senator Rand Paul on October 30th. You went through them, Emily, and found that Baric was being brought into the loop by spy agencies. Can you break down a little bit of what you found in these emails?
Yeah, so first of all, there's always been a little bit of suspicion that Baric had some sort of ties to US intel. First of all, why are we doing viral engineering work that doesn't seem to have civilian applications, right? So this thing called gain of function research, where you take a virus that circulates in animals, allow it to transmit in humans, and even make it more contagious or transmissible in humans. There aren't many vaccines that we can point to as having occurred downstream from that sort of research. So, you have to ask the question, if there is no civilian application, then what is the actual application? So there's been a lot of speculation that Baric was working with this high security lab in Wuhan precisely because he was collecting information for US intel. And there are other clues too. So the select subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic last year released this letter showing that on responding to freedom of information requests for his research and his emails with the Wuhan lab. Why would the FBI be personally involved in helping a virologist in North Carolina respond to FOIA requests for his records, right? And then we broke the story earlier this year that USAID had shipped something like 11,000 samples to the Wuhan Institute of Virology without any plans to get them back. And as we know now, USAID often functions as a front for the CIA. So there were questions about whether that in itself had, some sort of national security premise rather than just a public health justification. These new emails confirm that Baric was a top advisor on biological threats to America's top spy agency, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and that he met with them quarterly. This is something that I reported a few months ago, that there were suspicions that he and clues that he advised the ODNI. It's interesting. He gave a deposition to the committee I mentioned, and they actually mistranscribed the group within the ODNI, the acronym for it, but piecing together some clues online, and I was able to confirm that referred to this group within the ODNI dealing with biological threats. So these emails confirm those clues, and they also show that the CIA, in a meeting facilitated by the ODNI, approached Baric about some sort of project related to coronaviruses and human adaptation related to coronaviruses, which sounds a little bit like gain of function research. Unfortunately, we don't have many details beyond those emails, but I hope more details are forthcoming.
Well, and there are a couple of details in the story already that implicate two different presidential administrations, which is not at all unusual when you're researching and reporting out what's happening in the intelligence community. A whole lot doesn't usually change between presidential administrations in the intelligence community historically. So this is, as you mentioned, the emails are from September 2015. So that would be the Obama administration's ODNI. And then during the Trump administration, you have been on this for years, Emily. It looks like the DNI was, or we see it clearly, the DNI is dismissing the lab leak, publicly dismissing the lab leak, despite having all of this knowledge of what was happening behind closed doors during the Obama era and then likely into the Trump era as well. Can you help us understand a little bit about some of the subterfuge that we can look at as probably happening between both administrations?
Absolutely. Yeah, we got some early clues that political appointees in Trump 1.0 were facing obstacles to declassifying intelligence related to the origins of COVID. Now, CIA Director John Radcliffe was DNI in Trump 1.0 in 2020 during that pandemic period. And he tried to declassify records that, he thought pointed clearly to a lab origin of COVID, but faced resistance particularly from Langley, which is a reference to the CIA. These documents showing ties between Baric and the CIA, potentially even on a coronavirus project, might speak to why it was that the CIA was so reluctant to declassify that intelligence, because it could implicate the agency. And within ODNI, there is this specific office related to biological threats. And sources tell me that they received a presentation from people within the intelligence community who had interviewed Baric, who felt that all of the intelligence pointed to a lab leak, and they were dismissed as conspiracy theorists, essentially, as peddling misinformation. Another detail that's interesting here is that Baric himself advised the ODNI in January 2020, so within weeks of the pandemic emerging, that a lab leak was possible, that they were working on these SARS-related coronaviruses at a low biosafety level. Of course, what he omitted is that, he was integral to this project on SARS-related coronaviruses at a low biosafety level. And in fact, he had submitted a grant report in 2018, so 1 year before the pandemic emerged, where he laid out research that some scientists likened to a blueprint for COVID. He was interested in viruses that have many of the same unique features that we see in COVID, a furin cleavage site specifically, and that he knew that they would be doing this work in Wuhan at a low biosafety level, but concealed that from the intended funder in the US because he knew that Americans would, quote unquote, freak out about the shoddy standards in Wuhan. So a lot of questions here, but yes, so some consistency sort of within the deep state during Trump 1 and then into the Biden era, in ODNI specifically and the CIA too, on suppressing intelligence related to a possible lab origin. And I think Baric's connection to those very agencies is another puzzle piece in why that might have been.
And actually, I have that. I know you're a reporter, so this gets into a little bit of speculation. I do, though, wonder if you've come across information or if you have any of your own personal theories to the extent that you're willing to, speculate a bit about whether this intelligence operation was to keep an eye on what Chinese bioscientists were up to, or whether it was to work with them and use these lab conditions to do our own gain of function furin cleavage type research. Like, why are we getting any closer to the answer as to why the US was funding this lab? Was it for the sake of intelligence? Was it for the sake of collaborating with Chinese scientists for our intelligence? Can you tell us any more, Emily, about do these documents nudge us closer to one theory or the other about why the heck we had a presence over there with this research? Okay, so to hear the rest of this fascinating conversation with Emily Kopp of the Daily Caller News Foundation, where we discuss Senator Rand Paul, we discuss the administration's cooperation with Senator Paul and Emily and other reporters in getting to the bottom of this critical, essential story, because remember, we are not guaranteed a break from pandemics. Something could happen at any time. Horrifying, but true. And we need to have a government that is transparent and that is doing all the research it's doing in this space safely and with accountability. So this is a very important story. Emily also talks about her fellow journalists, what explains the lack of curiosity in the media, and what we know about why our government was doing this research to begin with and why our intelligence community was involved. So head on over to undercurrents.tv to get a premium membership and see the rest of the conversation with Emily Kopp over there.